Hi, everyone. This is Eden back again with another Mantic Monday episode. Today, we are doing episode 41, and we'll be taking a look at the astrology in the week ahead here. This week is featuring a Venus sextile Mars aspect that forms in the sky alongside of a Mercury Trine Saturn aspect that happens at the same time, which is also a really interesting thing that happens between Mercury and Saturn, because both Mercury and Saturn go through a change that is going alongside of the aspect that they are involved with. So we get these two dynamics that we're working with this week. Of course, we'll get into the timing of this during the video, and then we'll get into some of the ways you might interpret these aspects in archetypal narrative or language or psychology. So we'll get into this here in a moment. Before we do, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications so you don't miss any videos. Leave some comments in the comment section. And if you want to contact me personally, you can get a hold of me at lightcycleastrology.com. All right, well, let's pull up the real-time clock and take a look at the timing before we get into the archetypal themes that may go along with these two aspects this week. Now, you'll notice as we're starting off the week here on Monday that I don't have all of the planets in the wheel, and that's because sometimes seeing too many symbols in the wheel makes it just that much harder to focus and grasp or hone in on the thing that you are taking a look at. So if it's a planet we're not talking about today, I've removed it. So that's why you don't see like Neptune and Pluto and all of that. In any case, as we begin the week, we have Venus and Mars beginning to form a sextile. So this is probably happening Sunday before this week's Monday, where Venus and Mars move into the engagement range by sextile with one another. And as we roll into the first day of the week here on Monday, we are already in the beginnings of that contact. So this is when you may begin to first notice this Venus sextile Mars energy. Now, it is of note for sure that Mars is in a Venus-ruled sign. Venus is now looking back at Mars by sextile, meaning she is sort of keeping an eye on Mars as a guest. And sextiles were said to be of the nature of Venus anyway. So it's kind of like a Venus on Venus for Mars action going on this week here. So that is really interesting. And of course, we'll get into the archetypal narratives or themes that may accompany such an aspect. Now, if we go forward to Tuesday on the clock here, we are going to get now Mercury moving into the engagement range with Saturn. If you're new to the channel and this is a phrase you're not familiar with, engagement range just refers to how in ancient Western or traditional Hellenistic astrology, generally astrologers back in those days were using about 3 degrees before the exact alignment of two planets in an angle, and then about 3 degrees after. So, and they had a way of thinking about this too, where when planets began to move into sort of the engagement or the contact range, that those 3 degrees, it might be thought of as like that energy beginning to first become noticeable, or maybe even ramping up to some kind of boiling point. Now, the exact alignment may be thought of as the kind of the peak of the intensity of it, but it wasn't necessarily when you noticed a coinciding event, either internally or externally, concretely, or maybe psychologically. It can happen as things are beginning to ramp up before the perfection, or it can happen at the perfection, or it could be like thought of as a ripened fruit that is weighing a bough down really heavy, and there's about to be something that lets go, and then there's the coincidence right there. So you have about 6 degrees of the engagement range in total, and then right in the middle there is the exact alignment. So that's where we begin to notice on Tuesday that Mercury and Saturn are beginning to engage one another. Now, the actual engagement happens pretty rapidly. in the week. It doesn't take long because Mercury is such a fast-moving planet. We get the actual perfection of that energy just the next day on Wednesday. Now, on Thursday, something really, really cool happens. I say cool because for me, it's just, it's one of the more specifically Hellenistic techniques that we use if you are studying or practicing or learning about ancient astrology. And that is that Mercury becomes visible as an evening star. And that means that Mercury has moved about 15 degrees ahead of the sun in zodiacal order, which means that if you go out in the evening, just after the sun goes down in the west, you will begin to see Mercury returning as a star. Whereas up until this point, Mercury going through the whole cazimi is under the beams of the sun, meaning the sun is basically too bright. There's too much brightness in the sky because Mercury is so close to the sun that you don't see Mercury as an independent star. Now, by ancient standards and philosophy, when something becomes visible or when it transitions from invisibility to visibility, that was a very, very important moment because it was seen as kind of an omen that nature was trying to bring forth and express at that time. So it has the suggested divinatory message that is saying what once may have been obscured is now going to become visible. Or in Mercury's case, because Mercury is such a communicative planet, it may be that the communication that once fell on deaf ears now becomes something that is heard or something like that. But why this is so important is, again, also because we are seeing that Mercury is within that engaged trine aspect back to Saturn. So, and something that happens next is that Saturn is also stationing to turn retrograde this week. So Saturn is slowing down and about to reverse course. So that is the kind of technique that ancient astrologers paid a lot of attention to in terms of movements. It wasn't just aspects alone. It was what speed are planets traveling at? Are they about to change course? Are they about to become visible? All of these things were really intricate things that for me are fascinating. But that is definitely almost like for me, it's like the universe tapping you on the shoulder going, hey, buddy, there's, this isn't just a normal aspect. This is an aspect that has a lot of moving parts to it that is really specific. And think about Saturn things beginning to reverse course or change in direction or something like that at the same time that maybe perhaps communication becomes heard or there's something that has a breakthrough and is visible. So very, very interesting to me. Now, if we go forward to Saturday, now we're going to get to see the perfection between Venus and Mars by sextile. So that Venus sextile Mars energy has now reached sort of the peak, you might say. And then we're going to finish off the week on Sunday. There is something that normally I probably wouldn't talk about, but because planets are in the moon sign right now, it's going to be important to see what sign the moon is in as planets travel through her sign, because the moon is now hosting planets in her sign. So normally the moon is in a different sign every couple of days. And so it gets to be a little too subtle or tedious to sort of track the moon, although it can be a really fun thing to do. But for broader implications like mundane astrology, like we do on this channel, generally it's a little too subtle to kind of talk about things like that. But be that as it may, when planets are in the moon's temple, it's a little bit more noticeable because the moon is hosting those planets. So the moon will furnish or look after or otherwise describes the context of planets traveling through her sign. And that's one thing that we're actually going to talk about as a narrative here in a second. But of course, the moon is in a very good dignified place in Taurus being exalted and lifted up and celebrated, or however you want to think about that. The moon's energies reaching a kind of high note. And this is really significant in particular this week because at the end of the week here on Sunday, because the moon is now co-present with Mars, meaning that you have a very good planet that may be able to mingle the good fortune of its circumstance with another planet that is nearby it. And also the moon, of course, again, is the host of Venus. So the moon has visibility and reception back to Venus in her temple because sextiles can see each other's signs. And then you also have a host in greatly dignified condition that is able to give those greatly dignified resources back to any planets that it can see in its sign, as a good host would, right? If your host is rich and wealthy or well off, or there's something good happening with your host and you happen to be at their home, that's the way that ancient astrologers viewed kind of these relational dynamics between signs. Then that's all the more better. You might be being served caviar or something instead of macaroni and cheese. Not that we don't love macaroni and cheese, but you get the idea, I think. Okay, let's go ahead now and let's stop sharing the label and the chart here, and let's jump into some interpretive narratives for the week. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you will absolutely be in alignment with these narratives, and I'm not saying that there aren't other narratives. Of course, there are so many ways that you can interpret everything we have just talked about. But one of the ways in particular that I think may be noticeable is, for instance, narrative number one is simply changeability. And we talked about this already, but if you think about what happens with the moon this week, and now we have the sun, we have Mercury, and we have Venus actively doing things, right? Engaged in alignments and so on and so forth. But we have 3 planets in the moon's temple, and the moon begins the week in Saturn-ruled signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, then moves into Pisces, a Jupiter-ruled sign, then moves into Aries, a Mars-ruled sign, and then finishes off the week in Taurus, a Venus-ruled sign. So if you think about the moon in a way of almost being like kind of your moods and how your moods can sort of change, when planets are in Cancer, often it can mean that our moods are just a little bit more changeable, or it can mean that fortunes are sort of quickly rising or falling, or something to that effect, right? But there is kind of like the flavor of the course that is being served this week is kind of like, it's not bland and all one thing. It may be that there's a lot of changeability or variety in kind of the flavor of our moods, or like the flavor of things, where, like, for instance, when the moon is in Saturn's temple of Aquarius, the moon is going to give lunary Saturnine kinds of resources back to Venus and Mercury and the sun in her temple in Cancer. So it's like she may be wanting to nurture, but do so like with a, I'm telling you this because you have to be responsible. I'm nurturing you, but I'm doing so in more of like a distant or like hard-nosed kind of way, right? And so Venus is saying, well, I just want to hang out with friends and be social, and I'm feeling the need to get into some really emotional or sensitive things. And maybe the moon is saying, yeah, but the only thing that's going to be around until I get into another sign, maybe friends that are just a little bit more like Saturn-y. Maybe they're just kind of responsible. Maybe they're a little bit older. Maybe they don't have time to get into those emotional things. Maybe they don't like to get into emotional things. So you get the kind of the image that way. And then the moon moves into Jupiter's sign of Pisces, and then maybe that begins to change. Maybe you finally meet up with a friend who's really open and has a lot of energy and is really sensitive to your needs. And it's like, wow, now you got a sensitive Venus in Cancer, And you have a sensitive moon in Jupiter sign that's saying, yeah, I can go on this adventure with you, this emotional, um, deep, maybe intuitive kind of fun adventure. And so it changes the mood a little bit somehow or another. And then we go into a Mars, a couple of days where the moon's in the Mars sign, and then maybe it's a little bit more action-oriented, and then it ends the week in Taurus, Venus' sign, which is really good in particular because, again, the moon is exalted. So there may be, as this aspect between Venus and Mars is sort of going through that ripened stage where it's past perfection, but it's still in the air, and there might be something very laden about a Venus sextile Mars fruit that's about ready to drop. And here comes this really, really good moon as a host to all of these things. So it really gives you the idea that, wow, there could be something beneficial really coming through here as this aspect is really ripe. Okay. Narrative number 2 is going to be ears for hears that work it out. Now, I had a good friend that I moved away from. I live on the Big Island now in Hawaii, but I used to live on Kauai for many, many years, and I left behind some good friends that I knew for a long time. And the last time I spoke with one of my old friends, he said, I have ears for hears. It was the first time I ever heard that. I don't know if you guys have heard that before, but this, again, when we think about the specific movements that is happening, we have Mercury and Saturn in a trine, which is generally thought of as like a positive kind of an aspect. It's kind of supportive. Trines are generally like supportive or maybe lucky or beneficial somehow, or they may indicate favorable outcomes or something like that. Not always. Sometimes they're actually negative, but trines tend towards more of positive kind of outcomes. So we're looking at Mercury becoming visible as an evening star in a nighttime feminine watery sign, a planet that has a lot of ability towards communication and also listening to other people. So the communication is becoming visible. The listening is not falling on deaf ears potentially with Mercury's emergence back into visibility. And this very intuitive, watery kind of sign that is nurturing Cancer, nurturing, sensitive, emotional, sort of in tune with it. It sort of indicates maybe that there is a real integration with rational processes and your intuitive abilities, right? It's a time where you could really tune into the very sensitive, delicate intricacies of what is happening with your body, what is happening with your emotions, what is happening with the, sort of reading the room around you and what's happening with other people. So that all of those things are becoming enhanced, especially in a sign of Cancer, right? The work it out part, the fact that Mercury is in trine with Saturn, as Saturn is about to station retrograde. Very, very interesting. It's like, is there a limit? Is there an obstacle? Is there a roadblock somewhere that you've been sort of coming up against? And now Saturn stationing, stopping, and then reversing its direction as there's a trine with Mercury. Is it something like you come up with the idea that solves the problem? You communicate with a certain kind of sensitivity that allows for connection in a way that alleviates some kind of where there was maybe an alienation, or we didn't understand something, or we thought somebody was different but they're not. Saturn stationing and pulling back can mean, when Saturn turns retrograde, that can mean that the Saturn difficult thing is beginning to reverse. It's beginning to lessen or decrease somehow, or it's beginning to lose its power. Now, it doesn't always mean that. Sometimes it means that we are revisiting something that was challenging before, of course. But it can mean that Saturn's ability to really provides that blockage or that distance or that alienation, the ability for it to signify those things. It can mean that it's like fading into the background a little bit, or it's like losing some of that potency, something along the lines of like that. And it happens as there's this positive aspect with Mercury that is becoming visible in this very sensitive, watery place. So you sort of get the idea that it's maybe like where there was an alienation, that now all of a sudden the communication has a breakthrough. Maybe there's something mature about it, or there's something that is just, you're able to see something in a more of a mature or practical way. The idea sort of comes through, but it needs to be handled with some kind of delicacy and like how you would talk to a young child, and get the child to understand in kind of a more nurturing way. And somehow all of a sudden now things are humming along a little bit better, or something like that. So the ears for hears, and potentially things working out, or at least Saturn is an indicator of things that we work on, in a hard way, things that we're working on that somehow improve because of our mental sensitivity, or our intuition, or our more caring communication, or something like that, right? Okay, now the third thing is the sanding down of edges. This is very much in relation to narrative number 2, but we also have here that, again, Mars is receiving this sextile from Venus, a benefic planet that is in Venus's home. So all of that also indicates a similar type of thing, although it's much more Venusian, archetypally speaking, of course. But think about the fact that by the standards of ancient astrology, you have both Mars and Saturn were the two malefic planets, or the two planets that were the tarot cards, if you will, that would speak to things that are difficult, challenging, obstacles, bad fortune, bad luck, violence. Those two planets were the placeholders for negative, broadly speaking, negative experiences or things that could happen. When both planets are going through changes in a positive way, well, how do I say this? Saturn stationing to turn retrograde, but receiving a positive aspect from an emerging star and a sensitive sign. Generally, I feel like that could be positive. And then for sure, Mars, the other malefic, getting aspected by a benefic planet, Venus, with the moon coming through and becoming exalted in Taurus, hosting Venus, potentially providing some really positive resources for Venus. You just, instead of trying to interpret all of those things, it just, if you just pull out, it just has for me, it has the interpretive value of saying that, wow, it just seems like the rough edges are being sanded down. For one, because Mars is in Venus's temple, and Mars doesn't like to be in Venus's temple. Mars is sort of like Rambo on stage at a ballerina. At like a children's recital or something like that. And Mars wants to make war, or at the very least, he just wants to do something really impulsive and kind of energetically aggressive. And so Mars is really uncomfortable in Venus's temple because Mars is independent. Mars is impulsive. Mars can be reckless. Mars is like a bull in the china shop in Venus's temple. Mars has a hard time figuring out how to express itself in Venus's temple, because Venus's energy and Mars's energy are sort of antithetical in a certain way. Now, of course, they can also come together in a harmonious way, which is what the omen here is sort of speaking to with Venus in this sextile back to Mars. and the moon going through exaltation in Taurus and so on and so forth. So you get the sense that the rough edges of Mars are somehow being furnished or working out a little bit better. Not that Mars still doesn't feel a little bit Rambo-y, at the recital, but it's almost like the recital director says, hey, guess what, Rambo, we're going to give you a part where, yes, there's dancing ballerinas and they're very pretty and dainty and lovely, but they need a strong protector, or we need a character to stand guard on the tower, and that's going to be your character, and you're going to do that. And Mars is like, yes, I've got a place now in this weird environment that I don't feel totally in alignment with. So there's something like that where there's all of a sudden maybe the opportunity or the resource or the thing that comes through that makes Mars feel more comfortable in Taurus and allows for Mars's energies to be expressed maybe in more of a potentially positive way, which is nice. So the third narrative is, with the Saturn changing direction, receiving a trine from emerging Mercury back into visibility, with Venus and Mars coming through, the sextile with the week ending with the moon in Taurus. Maybe I'm going out on a limb and I'll be proved wrong by this, but I feel like it's just the week. One of the narratives of the week is that things trend towards kind of issues, problems, boundaries, roadblocks, irritating things that we're trying to figure out our place, and we maybe feel out of place, or aggressive, frustrated, repressed energies that somehow don't have a viable expression. All of those things, I think, are finding a healthy place to express themselves, or they're becoming alleviated or soothed, or the edges are sort of being sanded down in a way that I feel like is going to lend itself to more of the positive ways. For instance, Mars in Venus's temple in a sextile with Venus from Cancer could be very much about the positive attraction between a couple in a relationship, or meeting a new person that you feel wildly and dynamically attracted to, that is generally a positive thing for you, or something like that. Or being able to have more romance, or an improved sex life, or more maybe there's a breakthrough in parenting, or having children, or something like that. There can be some very positive things with this, and it can be kind of a passionate, very active kind of Mars that is furnished with getting things done and looking good doing it, or getting good looking things done. So that is number 3. I hope you guys have gotten something that makes sense out of this, or useful. Please let me know in the comments what you thought about this, and I'll be back again next week with another Mantic Monday video. We are working our way up to Mars's conjunction with Uranus in Taurus, which is going to be something we talk about here in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. Until then, I hope you guys have a good week, and I will see you back on the next Mantic Monday episode. Bye for now.